I feel like your emotions are your internal guidance system. And this is something I think that music and poetry and arts and sciences have the ability to really excavate in a very fruitful way. What am I feeling right now? And not shove that down as nonsense information. It's still very rare to find a space where you can be emotional and not be seen as like, oh, that's embarrassing.
Welcome to the One Planet Music Podcast, where we explore the role of music in an ever-changing world. As a listener, you'll gain motivation, inspiration, and practical knowledge from fellow musicians and music professionals who are making an effort to perfect their craft while having meaningful impact. I'm your host, Daniel Rinaldi. Many times we can be satisfied or even complacent with the way we describe our music. It's easy to call it happy or sad, and that's kind of it. and we know that the spectrum of human emotions is much bigger than that. And so our music should reflect that as well. That's why I'm so excited about today's episode with Hope Littwin, who is a composer, producer, and overall musical creative artist. We dive deep to really explore our emotional language, vocabulary, and intelligence when it comes to our musical expression. I hope you enjoy it. Hope, it's so great to have you on this podcast. I would love to first hear, what is your earliest memory of music?
That's a really good question. No one has ever asked me that question. This might not be the very earliest, but it's the one that first came to mind. And when I was little, maybe 5 or 6, my mom would put me to bed. And then after she tucked me in, she would then do her exercising. She had a Nordic track. So she would go in the living room and do her Nordic track. It's kind of like a little walking machine thing, and she would listen to Mozart while she was doing exercising. And so I just imagined, this is a very strange image, but I have kind of a movie mind, movies play in my mind all the time. I don't know if everyone else is like that or if that's a unique thing or not, but I used to imagine ants marching around my room to the music and stuff. It's just, that's all of the elements together made that memory kind of stick. You know, when you're little, you're kind of scared of whatever is beneath your bed or on the floor at nighttime when you're tucked in. So I just imagined bugs marching around to Mozart, and that's my earliest memory. And it was always Don Giovanni. That's her favorite opera of all time. So, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about where you were raised and growing up, and tell me a little bit what your childhood was like.
I'm a gypsy child. So I was born in New York and then raised in Seattle, Miami, Chicago, and moved probably every year of my life within those places. And then I went to New York City about 1.5 years ago. And right now I'm back in Chicago during the quarantine. But I'm considering moving to Los Angeles next. That is most likely the next move for me. And then I do quite a bit of overseas traveling. That's mostly for exploration, but it's not really, I guess in a way it's touristy, but usually I go with something in mind and I stay a while. So I went to India for a month on my own.
Oh, nice. I've been wanting to go to India.
Study Indian music as well as I could, which is a complicated thing to do because that's not really how it works there. But that's just all to say that it's not kind of show up for 2 weeks and stay in a hotel room. It's a very different type of traveling. But I consider myself very much a gypsy at heart. So,
do you consider any particular place home?
Nope. Sometimes I wish, I see people who have this very stable sense of home and where they come from. And I kind of envy that because I'm like, oh, what a comforting thought. Like it seems like warm and fuzzy and cake.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't have that
romantic
reference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really don't have that reference. So, but I kind of wish that I did. I guess you always want what you don't have, though. But I'm very happy to kind of be like a woman of the world in a way. Like I'm not afraid of showing up to new countries and just seeing what happens. That's, I think because of the way I was raised, I kind of don't think twice about doing stuff like that. So that's a benefit. But.
Yeah, I personally consider myself a world citizen.
Yes.
All the music you're about to hear on this episode is from our guest, Hope Littwin. And if you want to hear even more of her music, stick around until the end, and she'll tell you where you can find it. Hope, do you think that sense of being a woman of the world, a gypsy, how has that influenced your music?
It's really hard to know. I always think that like music is much more of when I try and define to myself even what we do as composers or what I do as a composer, I'm like, really, it's all arranging. It's like you don't really have original ideas necessarily. It's just like a kaleidoscope of all of the things that you've collected over your life, and then you curate them in your own way. So there's this element of design or arrangement or curating that is very prominent. But ultimately, it's just the pieces that you've collected over your lifetime that you kind of weave together. So I guess in one way, it's inevitable that everything that I've heard ends up in my music.
Sure.
But in another way, it's hard to point at things. I guess the most prominent sounds are what you're really raised with. And for me, that like it's very hard to get away from the fact that I was steeped in American culture. So, and I don't really notice that until I play music with people who did not grow up in the US. And they don't understand any of my references that I'm like, how does no one know this music? Just American folk music or, lullabies that all kids know because all moms sing them. But then you go to another country and no one knows what you're talking about. So it's kind of only in moments like that you're like, oh, I really do have a strong foundation of like Americana or something in a sound. But you kind of don't think about it until someone doesn't have that to reference. Yeah.
Definitely. So how would you describe your music?
Man, I wish I knew. I've said before, I've called it chamber pop before. But I don't know, every time I try to like hone in really for the case of like marketing or something, when people are like, well, you want me to come to your concert, so tell me exactly what you do. And then I work really hard trying to find terms for it. And then nothing really fits anyway. So I'm just like, I'll just make a video and then you can decide.
Nice.
But man, I don't know, because it's like weird to me, as I know that there's a certain responsibility as a creator to kind of describe what you're doing or to describe your intention or to make it clear what you're attempting to make. Maybe setting an intention is like more of the thing that makes sense to me. But beyond that, I don't know that it's a creator's job to define themselves. I kind of feel like that's
agreed.
The job of everybody around to then say, oh, this kind of fits here, or this is reminiscent of this, or clearly she was influenced by this person. Like sometimes people hear my music and they're like, oh, you really like Joni Mitchell. And I'm like, I love Joni Mitchell. So there's not references, but there's kind of like a clear lineage.
Like association.
Yeah. So sometimes when people say like, oh, what's your music like? I'll tell them, I'm like, do you want me to tell you who I believe my musical parents are? And then I'll kind of list off a couple names like Joni Mitchell, Bjork, Quincy Jones, and Mozart. And nice. Like if they could be my musical parents, I would be very happy. And in a way they are, because I've studied their work so much and I appreciate what they make so much that I feel like I've internalized it.
That's one eclectic family right there.
Wouldn't that be a great family?
Beautiful family.
In the stillness of the water, was it always as easy? Could it be I was pretending? Has it always been this way? In the stillness of the water.
Some of your work is like your own, but some of it is commissioned, right? So
right.
Do you see a difference between those two? Like when you have the full, you have an open field to be as creative as you want, and you're putting out an album or a single, whatever it may be, just a creative work, versus a client asking you to compose something particular.
I'm moving away from clients and more into, I really love collaborating. Collaborating is like my favorite thing in the world, like especially large scale collaborations that have like multimedia or dance or theater, or like I love having those kinds of conversations and kind of being in that pot of creative disciplines. And I trained in a lot of them. That's like something that I hold very dearly. Is I was trained as a dancer when I was younger before I came to music, and then I was trained in theater before I came to music too. So I have a deep respect for both of those art forms and spent a lot of time, like many years of my life, training in them. So they mean a lot to me. And in that way, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I'm not trying to work outside of collaborative environments. I've just found that when I have been commissioned for things, the only relationships that have really flourished have been relationships where people say, here's the general theme or something, or here's the idea that we're going with, or here's a story or whatever. I trust your artistic decisions. Go bring me whatever you can. I don't know. Everyone is different, but I kind of and I think it's because my tastes are so eclectic that if someone, and I trained a lot to get those things, you know what I mean? Like I'm very proud of those aspects of what I bring to the table, that if I'm with someone who's like, make this score and I want it to sound basically like the, I don't know, some soundtrack of this movie, but a little bit different. And then I'm like, I'm just not your girl. You hired the wrong person. I could do it, but I would gouge my eyes out and I wouldn't enjoy it. And that's not even what I don't know. So as I've been making more work, I've kind of realized more slowly that what I have to offer that is valuable is these kind of eclectic tastes and willing to reach outside of boundaries to bring a bunch of things together that maybe people didn't consider before.
Yeah.
And really creating a vibe and a mood and a space and an intention. It's very important to me to make something that I feel the world needs. Even if it's just like me and my friend or something, it doesn't have to be all of humanity. Like, I don't like the feeling of making something that I'm like, I don't know if I believe in that. Like, I don't know if I would want to see that. I don't know if I would want to hear that. I know that there's a certain amount. Yeah, and there's a certain amount, like, creating means you're going to make a lot of crap before you make something good, typically. So I accept that there's going to be trial and error, but the idea of just like pushing out a ton of work just to say that I've done work is not interesting to me.
A river doesn't struggle. 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 A river doesn't struggle.
You mentioned providing value and putting out something that the world needs. Let's talk about this a little bit.
Yay!
How would you define that? Because, you know, the quote unquote value in music, and not just, you know, monetary value, but in general, has sort of been changing, perhaps, or at least superficially throughout the decades. And like, how would you describe that your music is doing that? And like, what is it providing for people?
Well, I think it's dependent on everyone's mission. Everyone has a different mission and something different they offer. For me, my main interest is emotional intelligence and empathy and emotional nuance. So I'm very interested in this idea of allowing space and honoring the nuance of like human emotional capacity. There's I think it's Chloe Madanis. I heard this psychologist speak, I think that's her, quite a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And she was saying that she had studied the relationship between our vocabulary to describe our emotions and how that vocabulary actually affects how we feel. And she said that basically what she found in her studies was that we will change our emotions to fit the words that we use to describe them. So we'll feel a feeling, try to put our finger on what exactly it is with a word. And then once we find that word, we'll shift our emotion to be what we understand that word is, which means that we limit our emotional capacity to the vocabulary available, which if you think outside of words into music, into texture, into more like of the abstract worlds, the same thing can happen there. So searching for more color, searching for more texture, searching for more nuance, searching for a new way to combine things that kind of pinpoints, or I guess I like to think of like almost like dressing a new, what do you call that? Not just like a new feeling, but kind of almost like a new vocabulary word or something, but the musical version. Like finding that and being like, oh, it's not quite this. It's not quite this, but it's this other thing. And let's like give it its own clothes so it's not wearing like the hand-me-down clothes that don't even fit, that suffocate it from its like older brother. And it's like, you know, kind of honoring it and giving it its own stage so that our emotional capacity opens and expands, and we get to not only see more of who we are and honor more of who we are, but also honor more of who other people are. So it's kind of honoring the infinite complexity of who we are beyond the physical, but more reaching into the emotional world, which I think music is the language of emotion.
I've been walking around on eggshells across your angry mind. I'm running into some habits I'm ashamed of. I closed my eyes, now I am falling again, and I could die.
I feel like we're living in a time where it's so easy to see music purely as commercial or as entertainment, or something that is just meant to be background. How do you think about these things? Because what you're describing to me does not sound like that. It sounds like there's something much deeper, like giving us an emotional vocabulary, right? Like this is not something that when we turn on the radio, we're necessarily expecting to find is a deeper
But we should.
understanding of our emotional vocabulary, but we should. So tell me more about that. Like, how do you think about these things?
Man, I've walked out of so many theaters. Like, okay, I love opera and I love classical music and I studied it and it's like one of my great joys in life. But I am so surprised by how many times I've gone to the theater and been completely unmoved, like not even felt a thing. And there've been just like incredible performers and incredible everything. Like all of the elements are like super chopsy and very technically correct. And that's amazing. And that should be honored. But I feel nothing. And I'm like, how is there not a revolt? Like, how do so many people come to the theater at this point, not even expecting to be moved, not even expecting to walk out of having spent 3.5 hours of their life devoted to this thing that's supposed to lift them into another realm and kind of been like, or, you know, what's for dinner? Or I don't know, like completely unmoved. To me, that's like sacrilege. I don't know. I'm like, why? How is this the new normal? How is it the new normal to like turn on, I don't know, you know, like you were saying, radio for background music. So nothing should ever, not that I get put radios on in the background when I'm working on stuff.
Sure,
so it's not like the end of the world or anything, but I think the expectation that we won't be moved by art is really sad. It's sad. That wasn't your question.
And I mean, and you have such a wide palette as well. You mentioned that you like working in large scale collaborative works.
Yes.
I mean, you've worked with choreographers, directors, filmmakers, visual artists. I mean, like that's a wide range of creative work. You mentioned you have a background in dance, but in general, what draws you to collaborate with such a diverse group of creatives?
I think we're all trying to do the same thing. And it's a different discipline, so it's a different language, but I think it's a common goal. And I'm very excited by what ideas come to surface when you work with someone who speaks a different language but has the same intention. You know, like when you speak a different language, you think in a different way, or like you kind of, by the way the language is designed, it brings you to different conclusions. So you almost feel like you have a different brain in different languages, just because the structure of the syntax and stuff guides you in a different direction through your neural pathways. I feel like it's the same thing in working with choreographers or directors. Like you find yourself having to describe vocabulary words in what you're trying to make in such a strange way in order to meet them where they're at, that you then come to new understandings of what it is you're doing, which is really cool. And to like really question how your music is serving something. Like I feel when I do work with choreographers or theater people, it's like very clear to me that music holds an ambiance. It like holds the vibe of the room for something to flourish inside of. So it's kind of like creating a space. It's almost like when you have a dinner party and you just like put candles all over the room and like set the lighting and set the music and like make sure all the placemats are what. It's not the party, but it's creating the vibe that you want the party to have. So you're kind of like intuitively guiding what conversations you want to happen. You're guiding what, I can't think of another word for it right now, but it's like subtly manipulating the room, not in the negative way of manipulating, but curating, designing, influencing, holding space.
He caught my heart wide open. He aimed, I flinched, he clipped my wing. His song floated through my window as I went spiraling. Fly a kite into a hailstorm. That's how my heart was received. I crashed into these weeds, oh Captain, over from the ground. My hopes went up, we got shut down. The words were sweet from the receiver. Now he's nowhere to be found.
as you've worked with such a variety of, or in such a variety of creative works, how do you make sure, hope that you're tapping into that creative source? Do you ever feel like you're blanking out?
Never. I have worked really hard to stay very true to myself, and that has cost me a lot, but it means that I am never in a place where I'm like, I'm just not creative. I'm definitely in places where I'm like, wow, I'm fighting with a lot of people because I'm just not going to bend on this one. Or, wow, I'm really broke because I decided I just wanted to do it my own way, which means that I have to pay the bills, which is totally fair. But here I am. Or, I don't know, there's definitely a price to pay for saying, like, I'm going to do it my way. But to me, that price is worth always having access to and honoring and listening to the little voice that's like, actually, this isn't working anymore. We should really scrap it. But this is interesting. Or, you know, when you're working in different environments, you can't always do that. Like, you just kind of have to do what someone told you to do and put your head down and get your paycheck and ask for your name to please not be on that record.
Yeah. But so how do you keep that little voice alive? What do you think helps you? Are there any particular daily habits or a type of mentality that has helped you keep that little creative
extreme
voice alive?
self-honesty, like radical self-honesty, which I think is a daily, hourly practice.
What does it look like to not be honest with yourself? Because I think that's something that we don't often think about. Like, oh, I can't lie to myself. I can't not be honest
so
with
this
myself.
comes back to honoring emotions, actually. I feel like your emotions are your internal guidance system. And this is something I think that music and poetry and arts and sciences have the ability to really excavate in a very fruitful way. What am I feeling right now? And not shove that down as nonsense information. I feel like we are kind of steeped in a culture. I don't know what Colombia is like, but I know in the US, at least in my experience of the US, we're steeped in a very scientific culture. At least that's, you know, I was in academia and stuff. So that's the area of the US I was around. In general, emotions are not honored as scientific information. But to me, it is scientific information. It's just that we haven't done a ton of research into the body's intelligence, or like what those mean, what those signals that happen, like what exactly is that referring to, or like what are the nuances of that?
Actually, I've been hearing this a lot more lately, is this concept of EQ, of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And I think I have a lot of hope for where we're going, because I think there is an increase in people understanding or valuing emotions, and whether it's in the workplace and in any creative field.
Definitely. We're at the very beginning. I think it's something that people are still a little bit hesitant of. Like they're willing to like, there are people talking about it, which is cool. And they have platforms, which is great. Like there are podcasts and researchers and people writing books, and that's amazing. But it's not, it's still very rare to find a space where you can be emotional and not be seen as like, oh, that's embarrassing. Oh, she couldn't wait until she got home, or she's hysterical, or, you know, like all of these, like most people, when they cry, they try to hide it still if they're in public, you know, or if there's all these subtle things that we're just steeped in so much. It's kind of like the water we swim in. So even though there's advances, which is amazing, there's a lot of work to do there still. I think there's a lot of, typically emotions are still kind of seen as shameful, or like not for public, or I don't know. potentially extremely different in Latin America. So I don't want to like blanket things, but at least the culture that I was steeped in growing up, that was definitely the case.
But I can't get this pressure out of my chest, so someone tell me why. I am a bleeding machine, oh yeah, some kind of sick injury that I can't understand,
Are there any particular emotions that you tend to focus on when you're putting out music?
That's a very interesting question. I'm always drawn to the dark side because I feel like that's the part that's most confusing because we don't have enough, how do I want to say this? I feel like we've shoved down the idea of shadow self. Like in my culture, no one ever talks about death really. It's just kind of like the unspoken, like we don't want to talk about it. Or if you're in extreme pain or bereavement, grieving, you're kind of given a certain timeline for which you should then be over it and then move on. And like, so because that side has been so like muted and like suffocated, I'm drawn to it because when I feel those things, I'm like, I don't want this to feel shameful. Like I want to understand what's happening because I don't want it to keep looping back or to have to keep shoving these things down to pretend like they're not happening because it makes everyone else uncomfortable. So I think I'm naturally drawn to exploring those things, but that's certainly not my only interest. It just so happens that because those things seem taboo or like not even taboo, it's just like, I don't know, people like don't want to hear it. They're like, can we just talk about something else? Can we, you know what I mean? I'm like, nah, this is what I want to talk about. But mostly it's understanding self too. Like when I go through a grieving process or something, I immediately turn to music or to people who have created some work of art that sees me where I'm at and honors me where I'm at and doesn't pass judgment, but kind of creates a covering or a dressing for that.
Yeah, not too long ago, I was reflecting on this actually and thinking, what is the role of quote unquote sad music? Sad is just such a general term, but
oh, by the way, sorry to jump in, but the other part of that that psychologist talking about Chloe Madanes when she talks about we only have basically as many emotions at the end of the day as we have vocabulary words. She also said most people walk around with about 10, 15 vocabulary words. So you've limited your
like
infinite capacity. Exactly. You've limited your infinite capacity to feel to 10 or maybe 15 emotions, which is clearly not, when you think about it, how many emotions you actually have. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of terrifying.
I mean, it's a continuum. I mean, there's so many gray areas in between the emotions as well. So, I mean, all right, let's do a little exercise. Let's expand our vocabulary.
Yeah.
Not sad. Melancholic.
Good word. Yeah.
Depressive.
Keep going.
Maybe.
Are you describing my music?
No. I was trying to get to a question based on what you said.
Yeah.
Because you said you'd like to focus on the dark side, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking, what is the role
shadow
of like, let's say, quote unquote, dark music in helping people who feel like they're dark, but they want to overcome that dark emotion, right? It sort of it seems contradictory that why would you listen to a piece that is dark if you're feeling dark in the first place?
Because, well, I mean, it's...
But yeah, do you have any thoughts as to how it can be used as a tool for somebody who's going through these emotions?
Do you want people to meet you where you're at? And the only way through something or to the other side of something is through it. It's not shoving things down. I mean, this is why people spend so much money going to therapy and stuff, is they want to like be with that. I mean, you know, it's used in ways that aren't helpful too. So maybe that's a terrible analogy, but maybe this is related right now to this quarantine that's happening where people really, I mean, they can decide not to, but there's more ability to really sit with yourself in a room, which is not something people typically want to do because it's very uncomfortable. Right. But I think about that a lot. Actually, when I start writing pieces, there's usually like some existential crises of sitting down and facing myself and being quiet and being like, okay, now what? And it just feels like an opportunity for inner excavation. But I guess that question is potentially too broad because, you know, I can think of so many examples where there's like, instead of an honoring of a dark place, it's like a idolization of a dark place, which is a very different thing to me. So I think it's very delicate territory. But I guess it's kind of the difference between like having an experience of extreme grief where someone that you really love passes away and someone kind of sitting with you and being like, wow, that really sucks. I'm very sorry. I'll sit with you this week and like, you won't have to be alone. I'll make sure you're fed. Or someone staying with you and being like, yeah, everything is wrong with the world. Nothing is good. Everybody dies. Everything's the worst. You know, it's a very different intention there. But you certainly don't want someone to come to you during an experience like that and be like, don't worry about it. It's fine. Everything's fine. Just don't feel sad. You know, you're just like,
just dance.
Yeah, just dance. It's all going to be fine. Never feel anything sad. It makes me very uncomfortable when I see you cry. So please don't.
Right.
And,
yeah. That's so interesting. That definitely expanded my vocabulary just now.
Yay.
So, I mean, I feel like the things that you're describing give us such a deeper meaning and a much greater value as to the role of a musician or a music creative, you know, a composer, producer, whatever, in society. You know, it's much more than just providing a few songs for you to enjoy. What kind of feedback do you get from people about your music? And how does it help your process or deter your process?
I can't think of, like, I know people have had feedback before, but I currently can't think of.
Do you pay attention to it?
Maybe I don't. That was like what I was wondering. I was like, certainly people have told me things, but maybe I kind of take it with a grain of salt. I don't want to create in a vacuum, though. I mean, I really appreciate the dialogue around music. So it's not like, oh, I only create for myself. That's not true. I'm trying to think now of like response to my music. I honestly don't. I'm like kind of pulling a blank.
No, I think just by you answering that way, it says a lot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I tend to turn it to conversations, maybe. Like I'm very happy if my music creates a dialogue or a conversation that doesn't really have anything to do with me or necessarily what I made, but something that evokes a philosophical question or an experience that someone then wants to share with me, which I think is the more common response. And I think that is the intention behind what I make. I'm very interested in dialogue. So it's less interesting for me to say something to someone with a piece or whatever, and then for them to come to me and be like, here's what I saw in your piece, and more for them to come to me with like, this is an experience I had in my life. And I'm like, yeah, cool.
Mm. You know, a lot of musicians and composers might attribute their music either to themselves or to even forces outside of themselves. How and many other things as well. How would you describe, where does your music come from?
I think the analogy that I keep coming back to that makes the most sense, because I think it's a combination, is this idea of like the kaleidoscope. Like, I feel like I've collected all of these things from either the ether or from memories or from places I've been and things I've heard. I mean, it's just like this huge collection of things that I can't even sort out what came from what sometimes. All of those I've collected. And then my own interpretation is based off of how I was raised and how I was taught to think and experiences I've had. So then that starts to shape kind of how my synapses fire and what decisions I make. So yeah, this idea of kaleidoscope is the one that feels the most correct for what I do. And it feels a lot more like curating and designing and arranging kind of ideas from the ether than it is like, oh, I created an original thing. I've never felt that way looking at a thing that I've made. I think making work, I mean, not all the time, but like, it's such a tedious process, really, and it's so emotionally, like, it's like emotional digging. It's really exhausting and intellectually tedious and physically tedious often. That, like, if I can find a way to say what I want to say in any other way, I'll probably do it. Which is just to kind of take away the like, oh, I float around and it comes from God and it flows through me. I mean, I can see why people say that. But really, there's a lot of tedious work that goes into forming something into a form that can be consumed by other people. So like, I understand like the hit of an idea that you never had before, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, something is clear. But that's not the end. That's like the beginning. That's like the call to action. And then the action that is required and the skill sets that are required to turn that thing into a form that can then be shared with other people as a form of dialogue, as like a conceptual idea turned into form. That's really tedious work. That has nothing to do with the Holy Spirit or, that's just like sweat. So it's both. But yeah, does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, man. And I think that's beautifully put. And it explains some of the nuance in it, in that it's not, because, for example, if a non-musician were to get a musical idea, which I've seen it happen, like in a sort of a dream of sorts, they don't have the skill per se to materialize it.
Yeah, it's like there's a translation process.
Right. So I think it's having that balance of tapping into that that ether, as you described it, and then being able to translate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that following your creative intuition has had a price, or has, affected you, maybe being even able to pay the bills or something along those lines. Let's go into that, a little bit of some practical things. And since you mentioned, it seems like you don't mind talking about things that are uncomfortable. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
How to what extent can you make a living doing what you do?
I do. I figure it out, but I'm very scrappy, and this is actually a shift in my life that's happening right now where I have lived. And this is not, I don't think, because of creativity or something. It's potentially because of my stubbornness and my desire to spend all of my time studying or making things that no one paid me to make. You know, like, I think many decisions have gone into this, but I have lived like hand to mouth for as long as I can remember. And that is something that is no longer interesting to me, like starting this year, basically. So I'm in the process of shifting that and reading a lot of money books and marketing books and things that I never thought that I would dig into, just to kind of understand how I'm maybe holding myself back or how I'm limiting myself or arguing for my own limitations in that way. So that's a conversation I'm having with myself now. But I think the most important thing up until when I moved to New York City, honestly, was learning as much as I possibly could about my craft and really devoting my life to being a better craftsperson and building my skill sets and creating a lot. I really appreciated that time, and I may go back, but I probably will move on to LA for a bit. But it really, to be around that many movers and shakers who have like, they're working on a different level. Like, people make such vastly different incomes there than any other place I've ever lived because the opportunity is there if you put in the work and stuff. But also the rat race is intense, and it is really just really overwhelming. But
right.
I think I saw the capability or the possibility, like what you can do if you have really good intentions and you have money. And I was like, that I want. Because part of why I moved there is I was working a lot, like making a lot of projects on almost no budget, just like basically trading favors. Like, I'll play on your record if you play on my record. If you give me studio time, I'll promote your band. Or, you know, like just all of the trade systems. I basically survived off of trade systems for 10, 12 years. But that is limiting because at a certain point, you need much more capital than you have trades available in order to make a big project.
You can't barter with a grocery store.
And you can't barter with a grocery store. That's true. Yeah, I became more interested in not so much like how little can I do this with. Like, I think my kind of ego was in like, I made, so like Wild Beast, I made that whole record on $300. That is insane. And I think I was proud of it. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I know I can do that. That's good to like put in my pocket and to know that I can make really great work on almost no budget. But then I was like, but what do you think I could do if I had $100,000? What could I do if I had $1 million? Like, that's became a more interesting question to me all of a sudden. Not that it's all about money, just that I was like, I want to do more. I want to do bigger. I want to do it right too. Like, I want to feel good about paying my people and lifting them up with me. Kind of honoring how valuable I believe art making is with my own cash.
Definitely.
Like, really put my money where my mouth is.
So, like, what are some of the specifics in the sense that, like, is it coming from album sales, from concerts, from royalties? Like, where is this
I make very few royalties
from?
right now. Some shows. I just did a West Coast tour. My life shifts every couple of months as up until now, and I want to move that around because it's hard to reinvent your life every 3 months. So, like, you go on a tour for 3 months and your income comes from tour stuff. But then you're not on tour and you don't have any tour income. So you have to figure out other things. So I do teach lessons. I write for other people, like I get commissions to write for film or write for dance company.
Video games, I've seen.
Video games, yes.
You did a video game.
I did. It was super fun. I was a church musician for a really long time. I don't have a church job right now, but it's good times. I was a music director. I've been a music director for theater groups too. Really, album sales don't super exist, at least in my experience. I know people who do sell CDs. Usually they're people who are on the road 365 days a year and like visit cities where people still buy CDs, I guess. That doesn't make any sense to me, but I guess it happens. I'm in the process now of, well, I do have a Patreon. I release quite a bit of work on there. I'm in the process right now of really building kind of like a vision board for myself, where even if I don't make money doing these things right now, I'm happy to make it other ways, but really creating like, what do I want to offer people that I want to ask money for? But really, it's kind of, my intention keeps going back to how much value can I give? And I really think money will take care of itself if I can figure those things out, and to be much more specific with who is Hope, what does she make, who wants to know, and how do they benefit from those who want to know, how do they benefit from that? And those are not easy questions. Like, that takes quite a bit of excavating and quite a bit of self-honesty and a lot of brain dumping and like lots of writing on whiteboards to kind of try to simmer down, what am I doing? Like, what am I actually doing? At the core of what I do, what am I doing? Which it's not enough to say I'm composing. It's like, that's not even the beginning of the journey into what are you doing. Not that it has to be answered immediately. Like, I think it shifts as we make steps. But for me, I've made a lot of steps, and I'm interested now in like really creating a culture around what I do, so that when people want to do a project or something and they want to hire a creative on to be with them, then they can look at what I make and what I offer and be like, we specifically want Hope because she is interested in these subjects and creates this kind of work and has this kind of ethos. And we want someone specifically like that.
Your name would come to their mind.
Exactly. Not, we need a composer for a film. It's like, okay, literally anyone but me. That's who you want.
Right. No, I think that's a journey that a lot of us are on. And especially as technology changes, as social patterns change, we constantly have to ask ourselves, how can we adapt to the circumstances without losing our creative integrity?
Yeah, and like, what do people need right now? I think that's the big question. And how do my skill sets fit that need? If people need connection and nurturing right now, which I think that people do in this moment of quarantining, then it's good to like look at that and be like, okay, these are needs in the moment. How do my skill sets fit helping that or offering that?
That's a great service.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, as like robots take over, which they are and they will continue to, then the human services of like human care, and that is going to become more important.
Exactly.
And hopefully more
the
valued.
Value goes up a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I was for you. I won't ever be a fool again. I won't ever be a fool.
Hope, what is something that is coming up for you? What's on the horizon? What are some next steps? Something you're looking forward to?
Ooh. I'm working on a couple projects with people. One, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about them or not, but they're not, I don't know if I would call them, they are commissions, but they're more like, I'm mostly interested in being commissioned by people I have some kind of a collaborative back and forth with. but a choral work that I'm hoping to expand into like either like a staged cantata of sorts, or maybe like a mini opera, and some pieces for violin. And I'm learning violin for that project right now. I live with a violinist, so I've been taking lessons and kind of getting my way around the violin. And I'm writing
not
for...
an easy instrument just to pick up.
No, it is not. It is humbling. And I've been writing a piece for a vocal trio here in Chicago. I'm working slowly on my next album. Before Corona hit, I was doing much more of that, but I don't know. Because of the huge shift that has happened, like seemingly overnight, I've kind of stopped and pulled back a little bit to look at being more intentional about like, okay, considering the new circumstances, what do you really want to say right now? Which has been, and kind of it's forced me to restructure my life and how I make money, like everybody else. So that's taking a bit of restructuring in my brain. Like, how do I still remain of service and operate in the economic new world? Reading a lot more for different texts that I'm interested in developing. So yeah, kind of like these long winding novels that kind of lead nowhere, but everywhere at the same time. And just kind of, normally life is so fast paced that you're just like, or at least for me, I've just been reading books of like how-tos. Like, this is this new skill I want to learn. What's the how-to? Give me the most succinct version so that I can just learn it. And I'm kind of delving into this
7
other
steps
space.
Yeah, to learning the guitar.
I know. Oh my God, the worst. Yeah. I promise that I will never write this many steps to learn a thing. That is on my honor. And if I ever do, you come find me and play this back to me.
I will. I'm taking note.
Yeah.
Everybody listening, look out for Hope Littwin if she puts out any blog post.
And then come find me.
With steps.
And charge me. Request PayPal money from me.
That's right. Speaking of blog posts, where can people find you, Hope? Where can people contact you and connect with you?
I think the best way is through Patreon. Even if you don't have money to join, you can still follow the posts. But I've been making, if you're very interested in having a dialogue, having a conversation at a high level, that's the place where I'm really having it. I wrote long, beautiful letters about things I'm thinking about. I post videos of world premieres of my music there. That's, I think, the best. And then if you're not so interested in having the dialogue or the conversation, but just kind of want to see what work I've made, I have my portfolios up on my website, hopelittwin.com, or on YouTube. I have a lot of music videos on YouTube. Bandcamp I've been developing to have a lot more albums on. I'm also streaming on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all places where music is streaming. But not all of my work is there. That's kind of more my songwriting albums and then some soundtracks. My Facebook, you can join my email list through my website, and I send out periodic emails with information if there are shows coming up or new work that I've offered, or I send them out there. I've also been doing, since confinement, I've been making kind of like these little how-to videos, like different people on Instagram. I post a lot on Instagram, but people write to me through Instagram and ask through these like little how-to videos, like, oh, could you do a video on like your favorite songwriting practices? So I'll do little videos based on requests of things people want to learn that I feel like is helpful. A lot of people have questions on how to build their home studio now after the quarantine stuff. So I'm working on a little how-to video to put your own home studio together.
Perfect. Hope, it was such a pleasure talking to
you too.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and maybe you've learned a little something that you can apply in your music making or even the way you listen to music, and how music can really help us navigate through our complex and nuanced emotional journey as part of our human experience. If you really liked it, please take a screenshot of the episode, share it on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever you want, and tag One Planet Music. On Instagram, we're oneplanetmusic.fm. And it always helps when you go on Apple iTunes to give a review and a rating because it makes sure that the podcast can be heard by many more people. And also, as you might already know, we do have a Patreon account. What it means is that you can go and support this episode, and that way we make sure we can cover costs and just keep this podcast going and maybe even have it more regular than it already is. And if you ever want to reach out and just ask a question or make a comment, feel free to reach out on Instagram, oneplanetmusic.fm, and I'll be right there to talk to you. Much love.